Welcome to this Acumatica tutorial. My name is Zach Mayer with the Mayer Group, and today we're going to be talking about security in Acumatica. Now I'm here on my customer view dashboard, which is my home screen for this demo company. And to navigate to our security settings, we're going to be looking at two modules of Acumatica. So if we go to our more items here, we can see we have user security and row level security located under the configuration section. Now that's where we're going to be taking a look at most of our security settings for Acumatica today. So once we navigate to the user security menu, we see a few different headers here. The first one being user management, and those are going to be the three major forms where we can configure our security settings. The first one will be users, and this is going to be where we can control all the different users that can log into our system here. So by default, it pulls up the admin account, which is what I'm currently logged in under. Now for all of your different accounts, you're going to see these same options here. You're going to have the first and last name for the user, an email address and a comment, as well as their login name. You can select if they're a guest account or not, so the admin account is not. You can define a user type if you wanted to do so. So here we have a few different types we can select that we've set up, including general employee or sales employee. We can have a linked entity. Now for what this means, so if we pick a different user here to see an example, this is our user account for Layla Beauvoir. Now her linked entity is her employee account. So a linked entity is typically going to be linking an employee to the login. So separate entities that you're then linking together so that the login is linked to the user in the system. Now we have our first and last name again, as well as her email. Now over here we have some settings to allow password recovery or changes, and in this case her password never expires. Now if a user doesn't remember their password, you're able to reset it here. You can also disable a user account if they're no longer active in your system. And because I'm the admin, I do have the ability to log in as this user as well and see what Acumatica looks like from their end. Now down here we have our main tab that we're going to be looking at, which is our roles. So these are the different roles that have been set up for the users in this system, and we can check off the different roles that we want to give this user access to. And each role is going to have different abilities and permissions in the system, and we'll kind of take a look at that in a few moments here. So we see that Layla has AP Clerk, AR Clerk, Branch HQ, Branch VA, and a few other roles here that they're given permission to. Now if I quickly switched to a different user, I would see that these check marks are going to change, and that's because a different user is going to have different permissions. So now we see Joseph here is an administrator and does not have the AP or AR clerk that Layla did. Our next tab is going to be our statistics, so it's going to show when this account was created, when they were last logged in, if they've been locked out, and when the last time that happened, as well as some password changes. Then we can have some personal settings here if you wanted to find a time zone for companies that have different branches where users might be in different time zones. You can have a default branch associated with the user if you want to select one of your company branches, as well as what their homepage is. So this is where you can set what dashboard you want to make a specific user's homepage. So for the admin, we've been looking at the customer view. We could go ahead and change Joseph's here, change his home screen to the customer view as well if we wanted to do so. We see a lot of different options here. Some are reports, some are inquiries, some are dashboards. So you can basically set whatever you would like as the user's homepage. And you can see some device settings here as well, and some location tracking if you would like to set that up for your user. Now that is going to be a look at all the different tabs here for the user form. So we're going to move on to user roles. Now this is where we see we have the different roles that we're displaying in that list for the users to be checked off for. This is where you're going to configure them. So if we wanted to look at, we'll go back to our AP Clerk because we've talked about that one a bit. We see who is associated with that role. So instead of having to go to the user and see which specific roles are checked off for each individual person, you can go ahead and go to the role itself and then see a whole list of everyone that is linked to it. So we see that the AP and AR clerk are only linked to Layla, but if we wanted to go to administrator, for example, there's a few. So that's going to be a quick way to see who is linked to each role, as well as if that role is considered a guest role or not. And then our third form for our user management is going to be our user types. Now here we can select a user type from our menu. So we saw a quick look at these earlier. So if we want to look at our general employee, for example, we're going to see that the linked entity is employee. You have a drop down here where it can be a contact or an employee, as well as a description for the type. So these are going to be employees with UI login only. Now down here you have the allowed roles. So it shows you which roles are going to be associated with this user type. So in this case, branch HQ is checked off. You also can see the users that are going to have the functionality provided by this user type. So we see a long list here of all of the active users that are associated with the general employee, as well as some login rules that you could set up. If you want to require that every user of this type has to reset their password, or require login activation. And you also have the ability, once you select which roles are going to be allowed for this type, you can apply it to the users that are associated with that role as well. Now we're not going to go through every other form here in the user security section, but you do have access rights. So you can configure the access rights by the role, by the user, or by the screen. So these are all going to be providing rights based on the different level of security. So here we're looking at the user level. So if we go back to Layla, we can set up the access rights for her specifically. Here we see she's revoked from the rights for commerce, but if we switched it to banking here, it's going to pull up a long list of rights, and we see some she has delete access, some are granted, some are view only. So we're going to take a look at these different access rights here. So as we pull up our 1099 vendor history, we see that her access rights are deleted. Now deleted is going to be the highest level of access right. So you can have somebody be view only, where they can only view that specific access. They cannot edit it, they can't add to it, they can't delete it. Granted is going to allow them access to that right as well, whereas delete is going to be the highest level, where you can view, edit, add, and delete. So you're going to be able to see just how much you have the control over every individual access right here, configuring it for the specific user. Now we'll go take a look at it on the role level and see that it's going to be a pretty similar setup. So here we're looking at the role instead of the user. So we'll go to our AR clerk. Now we see these access rights have not been set up. Now we are able to pick from the drop down on the rights by role, and here we can see if we revoke or grant them. Now in this case they're all set to not set, which if no rights by role is set up for the compliance category here, not set is going to provide access to everyone. But if some rights by role have been configured to be either revoked or granted, it's going to default not set to be revoked. So if nothing is configured, it will grant it to everyone, but if something's configured, not set will default to revoking those rights. So that is something important to keep in mind. And here we see the full set of options for some of your roles here, or some of your access rights. So again, we have our not set, which is by default, revoked if you do not want them to have access. View only is going to allow them to view it, of course, but they won't be able to alter the information at all. Edit allows them to edit active situations where it's not inserting a new field, it's not deleting a field, it's only editing the ones that exist. Then of course insert's going to allow you to add to the system, and then delete will allow you to remove something. And of course each one builds on the one before it. So if you can edit, you can of course view it as well. If you can insert something new, you can also edit the current records. And if you can delete it, you could insert or edit. So it builds with delete being the highest level of rights. Then we have some inquiries here, some reports. So if you want to look at a user list, there's going to be a report here that'll give you a whole list if you wanted to run the report. And it'll show you the breakdown underneath the roles as well. So here we see admin, we see Andrews, so all of our different users here with a list of each role that they have underneath them. You have the type for the user, as well as a few different pieces of information here, showing whether they're locked, their email address, etc. And then you also have your preferences. So if we go to our security preferences here we see our security settings for user security. So we have our password settings if we want to set up a password policy where you can change your password every so many days. You can have minimum requirements for it. You can have two-factor authentication for Acumatica. So if you want to require it, you could do so. You can allow text or email for that two-factor authentication, or both. So if we wanted to add that, we could do so pretty easily. As well as you can have your account lockout policies, encryption, audit, as well as some external identity providers set down here, including Google and Microsoft. Now we're going to quickly talk about our second security category here, which is row-level security. So we'll look at our first one under configuration, which is our GL account access. And here we see our row-level security screen. So this is going to have a group name. So in this case, we're looking at international customers. It gives us a description, which is access for international customers, and we have a group type. Now you can have multiple different groups with different sets of access. So you can have Group A, Group B, and then the inverses of Group A and Group B. So if you set up something for Group A, you can have the opposite happen to the inverse group. So here we see for this international customers group, these are the users that have access to this international customers group. So we see Layla, we see Michael, we see Todd, they're all selected for the account access for international customers. So you have the user breakdown as well as you have the account breakdown. So in this case, international customers do not have access to any of the accounts listed here. You can also have some sub-account segments shown here, which again, none of them are selected. Now if we switch it to a different group name, we do see that the cash account access does have our accounts, or a few different accounts here selected, as well as a different set of users. If we switched it up and looked by branch access, here we see it's branches instead of users. So you have a lot of customization again here where you can configure what users, what branches are selected for different groups, and what those groups do have access to. You have customer access as well, so it's not only branches and users, you can look at a specific customer, so it'll show all the customers in our system, vendors, inventory items, warehouses, projects, emails. So you have a lot of configuration that you can do here for that row level security compared to our user level security that we looked at before. And that is going to be a quick overview of our user security and row level security options in Acumatica 2020 R2. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the Mayor Group and we would love to discuss it further. But thanks for watching and we'll have more tutorials coming soon.